Hey guys, Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Cold Storage. So, when I saw the trailer for this movie, it was sort of more so promoted as a comedy horror, and it felt bizarre in watching this movie as it felt like, at least in terms of presentation, that a lot of the comedy was dialed down. But the dramatization also felt very much dialed down. I'm not sure what led to this movie, but boy oh boy, this felt like it needed a little bit of a retouch in the opposite direction of where it ended up. Anyway, this is going to be my review of Cold Storage. So the movie begins in the 70s, as we see that the military has come into contact with a substance that seems to spread like a fungi that turns humans into essentially the equivalent of your zombie, with slight intelligence left remaining, that being in this instance. We cut to 18 years later, after seeing Romero and his partner have to see the third lady that got the call about this shoot herself after herself getting infected. And of course, we then get the time skip and cut to present day, and we see how much the environment has changed. It seems like this building seems to be like a warehouse of sorts that I guess people can store items. I am not familiar with this type of like business, I guess. I don't know. like I don't know where this takes place, but yeah, it's an odd selection for an area, that's for sure. But I digress. We meet our main characters named Tea Cake, or as we learn later on in the movie, Travis, but I'll call him Cake for short, and Naomi, the lady on the right of the poster there. After hearing a strange noise, Mr. Cake pulls Naomi into his little into the hearing the noise, and she and her natural curiosity pull them into a further investigation. Meanwhile, Romero, played by Liam Neeson, calls his previous contact from the beginning of the movie at this point in the movie, but not before reaching a contact in the military, but that she goes by the name of Abigail as a sort of code name, so we'll just stick with her code name for the sake of this review. Anyway, so Mr. Cake goes inside the wall to see the old military complex behind the facility that has been sort of plastered over with other walls. And this leads them to see how far the path really goes. And it goes further than either of them expect. So they head down eventually after some semi-convincing. It is hard to say that either of these characters really have much character outside. I guess Cake is supposed to be representative of someone who grew up in the hood, or somewhere a lot more urban in terms of his dialect. But in terms of an arc, I'm not really sure what his arc is meant to be. He seems a lot more of a flat character, or a character that doesn't, or rather, a character that does not go through an arc. I do want to distinguish those two things as a reviewer these days, because I do think that when a lot of people hear the word flat in direct, when it's supposed to correlate to a character arc, they might think that that means it's terrible necessarily. That's not necessarily the case, though. So that's why I want to try to do that for other future reviewers moving forward. So I just say, so from this point forward, I just say the phrase, a character without an arc. Unfortunately for these characters, they just additionally happen to also be flat. They are boring to kind of watch and get through this movie with. They aren't your, speaking of characters that don't go on a character arc necessarily, but are not necessarily flat either, would be a Jack Sparrow of sorts, or James Bond, or something along these lines. Somebody who, again, might not necessarily go through an arc, but is engaging to watch. Anywho, so they head down and investigate and see some infected stuff, like an infected, all the while seeing, we as the audience see an infected cat from the outside, and how the infection even spreads, bursting out, and then when it touches the ground, it spreads even further in from its current position. So it eventually infects Naomi's ex-boyfriend, I assume this is meant to be, and some random deer. They also encounter a rat king of sorts, an infected rat king, more or less. But the infected boyfriend is joined by the deer. And, the deer, I suppose is meant to play off as, again, this sort of comical bit, but it's played in such a bizarre way that it never comes across as something that's even meant to be taken that lightly or elevate their interactions seem to be bewildered with the expectation that there's meant to almost be a laugh, but it never really lands anywhere in the movie. This remains pretty consistently throughout the movie as we move ahead. So, we see some bikers return later on in the movie, and those who also then get infected. As Romero is working his way there, and is getting ready to set off a bomb that will inevitably blow up. It is up to our two others to place the bomb. That the countdown sort of fidgets from time to time. Both of it, again, will inevitably go off. And is going off as they are prepping. And our heroes, of course, manage to escape, obviously. We then cut to some X amount of time later where the Abigail lady meets Romero and thanks him for his due diligence in all of his work, and Naomi hooks up with Cake/Travis at the end of the movie. And that's pretty much Cold Storage. It comes across as, again, a really surprisingly flat movie. And I think they could have had a little bit more fun and variety in terms of, thinking of different ways of using the infection that might have been a little bit more humorous or maybe horrific in comparison. Because the balance never feels like it's shifting at all. It never feels like it's escaping this sort of more homogenous type of movie in terms of pure presentation. And this is all in line with the characters additionally, again, just being pretty much flat for the most part. We don't really get much in the way of characters developing, which is a shame, because some of the greatest, zombie things, including series like The Walking Dead, just as an example, has some of the best character development in horror history. I mean, the arc arcs, plural, that the main character goes on are quite numerous and really set the stage for an interesting and engaging character to watch. And his arcs usually are, placed up against an antagonist that is meant to, be sort of not just a character, but additionally out of context of that, the lesson, the thing that he's going to embody as he's moving forward. You have Rick dealing with his cop buddy, whose name is escaping me off the top of my head right now anyway. But, that character really is in the mindset of we have to deal with zombies. We cannot just go off of the whims of, people still feeling sympathy for people who have turned. And that all comes to a head in season 2 of The Walking Dead. A lot of people say season 2 has quite a number of issues because they stay in the barn too long. But I would argue that was never a real complaint. That's a fake complaint. I'm sorry. I am so tired of we've been in X location for far. It doesn't matter. What is the story you're telling while you are there? That is the part I barely see anyone criticize for season 2, which is why I would argue that season 2 gets a lot more flack than it likely has deserved in the past of The Walking Dead. After all, this is a lot of the moments where you see a lot of other character arcs that really move a lot of our other favorite characters forward in really cool ways. Glenn in particular being one of them. But Rick, as I just mentioned, also does it as well, dealing with it, finding Sophie in zombie form and being the one to deal with that in that emotional state. Again, going through that character arc within that moment. But here, in comparison to Cold Storage, it doesn't feel like our characters are growing in that sort of way. There's no connective tissue there. It just feels like sort of like she's curious in the beginning of the movie, she remains curious at the end of the movie, but she wants to get out, obviously. He's sort of semi-aloof, I guess I would call the main character in Cake, and he kind of ends the movie pretty much in the same position as well. Romero doesn't get much of anything either. He's not much of a character, if anything. He's there to just do a job. That's about it. Now, I think one thing is vitally important to point out here, though, because I don't necessarily think that's all necessarily bad. And let me explain why. You see, there's something I noticed about character arcs, is that there was a point out of a character that didn't have necessarily the most notable arc, at least on face value. The personality of the character in the movie Goat, which is a movie I reviewed pretty recently, all things considered, but the reason I bring that up is that the character arc of the main character, Will, isn't necessarily that the character is moving in a personality direction, but rather the environment around him is what is allowing him to have a type of arc. It's not a character arc, it's a world arc that is pushing the character in a direction. And I think that sometimes can get overlooked. And I do think that that is kind of present in this movie to a degree. I just don't think it's substantive enough in comparison either, to be honest. Which is why I would probably give Cold Storage around a 4 or 5 out of 10. It's a very below average to meh, pretty acclaimed movie. And mayhaps it might have to do with the representation of how they decided to brand this movie in terms of just its outlook. Maybe that's it. But the character writing also suffers significantly so. It's not just necessarily that the way it looks doesn't feel like it's meant to be a comedy or necessarily a pure horror, and even the fusing of these two feels completely underwhelming, and when you put those two things together, it feels even more underwhelming, if anything, by that logic. So that is why I would place it at that lower end of the 4 out of 10 rather than even a 5 out of 10. And that to mention, the flatness of the characters, again, also drags it down to that score. These characters simply aren't engaging enough to occupy a really satisfying movie. I think people are satisfied with enigmatic characters that have energy and really breathe life into the roles that they are given. This is played rather flatly, as I've been arguing throughout. And, like I said, while the world is having an arc and the characters are flat, again, I think that the presentation and in comparison with the flatness of the characters themselves doesn't lend itself to being that strong as an outcome. At least when it comes to like a movie of Goat, it's isolated to one character in Will. Here, every character feels that they are flat. So it's significantly way more noticeable when the entire world feels flat. And the only thing changing, or all the characters feel flat, and the only thing that seems to be changing is the world. Now, of course, the movie ends with some sort of implication that there might try to imply a sequel by having another deer, because the deer we saw previously explodes, turn toward the camera and vomit towards us, the audience, and that's how the movie ends. So it's also attempting to sequel bait, which I don't even think is a good idea if the movie you're already having play out isn't really all that good to begin with. This movie definitely needed some sort of reshoot or even rewrite, or both necessarily so, to really land. And as such, that is where I will place Cold Storage in that 4 out of 10 category. And that is my review for Cold Storage. If you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One, head to my petition about small YouTubers. Second, to my PayPal, you can help support me, my channel directly. And third, to my Discord server, you can join, collab, shield, all that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.